WWII.
Will you please tell me the branch of service you joined?
The Navy.
And did you joined or did you get drafted?
No, I enlisted.
Enlisted? Why did you enlist?
Because I don't want to sleep in a foxhole. I wanted a clean bed.
That's not true.
That's why I wanted the Navy. I like the Navy.
When did you enlist?
I went down originally in March of 1945, and I was trying to get into the Air Force, Navy Air Force, but that program was just closed. And then I went for aerial gunner. I took all the tests and I passed them. And then they told me they were going to send me to Arizona, I believe it was, for 4 years of college. And I said, I didn't want to go there. There was a war on. I figured in 4 years the war would be over. So I left and I went down and I enlisted in the reserves. And that was, I guess it was April by that time. And I enlisted in, which was a duration of 6 months. And I got called into, I was sworn in, but I got called into active service in April of 1945. I'm sorry, May of 1945. And I was sent to boot camp, Sampson.
Where were you living at the time?
We lived in Queens Village, New York, which is a borough of Queens, suburb of part of New York City.
Do you recall your first days in the service?
Oh, do I? Vividly. I was 17 years old, and we went to Grand Central Station at night, and they loaded us into a train, and we rode up to Sampson all night long. Got there in the wee hours of the morning. Nobody slept, of course. And they took us, and they cut our hair off, and they took our clothes away, and they gave us our needles. And that was one of the longest days I ever experienced. When we broke for lunch, I thought it was dinner time already. That's how long it seemed. And that was the first day. It was quite an experience.
Can you tell me anything from your boot camp experience?
Well, the interesting thing was my cousin, who lived in Maine, joined the service 3 months before I did. We were approximately the same age. I think he was a few months older. And he told me, whatever you do, don't go to G Unit, like I had a choice. That was called the Gestapo unit. So at the end of the day, I look around and I said, where am I? And the chief told me, you're in G Unit. I said, oh my God, you know, that's terrible. So I wrote a letter to my cousin, and I gave it to the chief to deliver it. And he calls me in and he says, who is this guy you're writing to? And I got scared. I said, it's my cousin. He says, do you know where he is? I said, no. He says, he's next door, in a barracks next door to you. So the next morning, we stood at attention to go to mess hall for breakfast, and I see him running up and down trying to find me. He didn't recognize me with my hair cut off and everything. So in any event, when we got to the mess hall, I couldn't break ranks to stop him. But when we got to the mess hall, he came around and he found me, and he was right next door to me. So we were together for about 3 months. And then we had 2 weeks of work week, where we had to do work we stood either guard duty or we had to work in the kitchen for 1 week. When I got to the kitchen, the chief cook there, the chef, calls me and he says, do you know there's another Giftos up here? I said, yeah, I do. He said, what's he to you? I said, my first cousin. He said, you're kidding. It turned out he knew all my relatives in Pittsfield, Mass. That's where he came from. And he knew all my relatives there, and right away What do you want? Anything I wanted, he would make for me. He cooked special meals for me all the time. So that was an interesting experience too.
Do you remember your instructors?
I think one looked like a dragon. He was a tough guy. They were all tough. They were only seamen, not much older than us, but as far as we were concerned, they were God. We couldn't talk back to them. We couldn't do anything. They were tough, and it should be that way too. I think they baby the servicemen today.
After boot camp was over, where did you go?
Well, when boot camp was over, we went to a staging area up again back in Sampson, where they put us in these barracks. And we were waiting, staging area, preparing for the invasion of Japan. And we were waiting for a ship to be assigned to for the invasion. And one morning, I guess we were there for about maybe 2 weeks. We woke up one morning, maybe it was 3 weeks. Woke up one morning and we heard the news report that we dropped an A-bomb. So we said, what in the heck is an A-bomb? So we didn't know what it was, and we found out what it was later. And then 3 days later, they dropped a second A-bomb. And at that point, they called the invasion off, and they sent me to Rhode Island to firefighting school. I was there for 10 weeks, learning how to fight fires. Because on a ship, if there's a fire, you can't run away from it. You have to fight it or go swimming. So we were there for 10 weeks, and after we went through that training, they shipped me down to Virginia, and they put us in barracks, and the ship was being finished. The aircraft carrier that I was on was being completed, and we had to stand fire watch during the day, watching the welders to make sure there's no fire. And at night, we would load supplies onto the ship. And we did that for a number of weeks, and finally, by December, we were on a ship for commissioning. So I'm what they call a plank owner, one of the original crew.
Do you recall the name of the ship?
Absolutely. The USS Tarawa, CV-40.
And what did you do once it was completed and commissioned?
I was assigned to the flight deck. We worked on the planes on the flight deck. We would move the planes and get them ready for takeoff, get them started. When the plane starts, we had to stand next to it with a fire bottle in case it backfired and flames came out. We had to put the fire out. And we had to man the chocks so that we had the planes, they chock the wheels so the plane won't roll around back and forth because of the pitching of the ship. And when we had to move it, we had to remove the chocks and guide the plane to where it was going to go for takeoff, or to the catapult where it was launched. And then when we retrieved the planes, we would park them up in front of the ship until they all landed. Then we had to move them all to the back of the ship. We had 4 tractors, and we would use them to pull the planes back to the back of the ship to make room for the next takeoff.
How many planes could fit on one ship?
We had 101 planes in that one. That's right.
Wow.
101.
Wow. And was this in Virginia?
No, we went on a shakedown cruise, because when you're on a new ship, you go on a shakedown cruise to make sure everything's working right. And we went to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. And we spent about 3 months in Cuba. And then we came back to New York. Well, first we went down to Virginia and went to dry dock to make sure everything was all right. And then we came up to New York. And from there, we were asked how many guys want to stay on the ship to take the ship to the West Coast through the Panama Canal. Well, nobody wanted to do it. So one morning, we found we were out to sea. They picked up the gangplank and they took off. They shanghaied us. So we ended up going through the Panama Canal and going out to the West Coast. then they asked us how many guys want to go on a trip around the world for 1 year. And I said, that's it, I've had it, I'm getting off. And they shipped us back by train to New York. It took us 5 days to get back. Some of the guys stayed on that ship and they went for this trip around the world, which was interesting. But if I had done that, I might not have met my wife.
Now, right before you would have been sent overseas, the war ended.
Yes, well, the Japanese decided to call it quits after the second A-bomb. They didn't know we only had 2 A-bombs, and we used them up already. If they knew that, they probably would have stuck it out. So they agreed to surrender. So actually, we called the invasion off at that point. I have some interesting information about the invasion, which I'll give you after. You can read it. Because I noticed that they're rewriting history today. My granddaughter comes from school, and she tells us it's a terrible thing what we did to the Japanese. And it was horrible the way we bombed them. But they don't realize who started it and how it happened. And I got some information I'll give you later.
The atmosphere must have been different. How did you feel knowing that you weren't going to go to war?
Well, up until we heard the A-bomb was dropped, we were kind of, I guess, starting to realize that we're going to face the Japanese for the invasion, and they were predicting 1 million casualties. So we were a little concerned, and actually President Truman saved our lives by dropping the A-bomb. And so after that, we were relieved, and it was an interesting time in the Navy, but I wanted to get back to civilian life since the war was not on any longer, and we weren't really contributing anything. Although we did a lot of things on the flight deck, we were training pilots for landings and takeoffs, and they say that the most dangerous place you can be in war or in peace is a flight deck of an aircraft carrier.
Really?
Yeah. We lost quite a few men. It was very dangerous.
Where were the planes taking off to?
Most of the times it was for training sessions. We would launch them, they would take off, and they would do some bombing runs on some and strafing by guns. It would tow a target in the back of our ship, and they would practice sessions, also landing and taking off, because that's a tough job, landing on an aircraft carrier. It's a real tough job. So we were training flight crews for the most part, and the only time they took off to go anyplace was when we neared an island and they wanted to go on liberty, so they'd land on the island, and we would have to go and tow the planes back and hoist them up with a hoist to get them back on the ship again.
You mentioned going to dry dock. What is that?
A dry dock is a place where they take a ship and they bring it into this, it's like a slip, and they bring it in and they position it, and they lower the water out of it, and the ship comes down and ends up sitting on some blocks, big tremendous blocks, and they empty all the water out, and it's dry now, and then they go and inspect the ship from top to bottom to make sure there's nothing going wrong with it. And I remember getting off the ship and going down in the dry dock and standing underneath this aircraft carrier. It was quite a moment to stand there and look at this gigantic ship. At that time, it was the largest ship around. After that, at the time when we left Virginia, they were just laying the keel for the USS Roosevelt, which was the next size bigger ship. But at that time, ours was the largest. We just barely made it through the canal. That's how, in fact, we had ladders welded to the side of the ship, and they got ripped off because that's how tight it was.
So the next size up can't go through?
No, it can't go through the canal.
Wow. What was the food like on the ship?
It wasn't bad. The only time it was really bad was Sunday night when they served cold cuts. And 9 times out of 10 it was still frozen. But for the most part, the food was good. And we had about 3,500 men there, about 3,500 men on our ship. So, and 101 planes. And it was a city in itself, that ship. And we carried fuel for the ship. We carried fuel for the planes. We carried fuel for the 2 destroyers that would follow us at all times. And it was, like I say, a city in itself. We had, I guess you would call almost a mall. We had stores, shops, laundry, barber shops, everything we had there. A very interesting setup.
What did you do for entertainment?
I guess we played cards. That was about the size of it, I guess. Red. Mm-hmm. That was it. Oh, when we went on Liberty, when we did get to Liberty, it was a different story then. Then we had fun.
Where did you go on Liberty?
Well, in Gitmo Bay, we went to Santiago. And when we went to Guantanamo Bay, they had the Navy base there. We would go there and smoke these Cuban cigars and drink beer. And we went to Santiago. We did a little more than that. And then we went to Liberty, New York, Virginia, Panama Canal, both sides, Long Beach, California.
You danced with the girls.
Of course. I don't dance with guys.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Trying to think humorous. Not offhand. Unusual events, or a lot of unusual events on a flight deck, that's for sure. You never knew where it was coming from.
Did you or others pull pranks on each other?
Yeah, we did that from time to time.
John. That was unusual. Another Greek guy.
Well, it was just on in my company. Actually, when we went to boot camp, the first week or two, there were a lot of young guys there, and we would hear them sobbing sometimes at night because they were homesick. And we never really, we let them alone. We never tried to do anything with them. We figured let them work it out. We never said, well, this guy was doing it or that guy was doing it. We just kept quiet about it. But one of the things we used to do was, if somebody would sleep on his bunk and his arm were hanging over, they'd take a bucket of water and slip it up to his, and put his hand in it, which they would make him want to get up and have what we call a piss call. Can you use that? That was, I guess, as far as pranks go, we couldn't do too much because it really kept us on a short leash. We couldn't fool around too much.
What was your highest rank?
Seaman second class. Although I had a position which called for a higher rank, but because I was in reserves, which was a duration of 6 months, they didn't advance me. They just kept me right there. I don't regret it because I wasn't there that long to make a difference. But if I had stayed in, that would have been higher than that. But I can't tell you where we would have advanced to. I was the head of my division, the V1 division, and which called for a higher rank. But like I said before, because I was in reserves, they didn't advance me.
What was your duty as the head of the V1 division?
Well, I had to, I had the crew. I forgot how many men there were, but I would make sure that they got to their stations. I would assign them to different spots that they had to be at. I had to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. I had to oversee them.
And what does V1 stand for?
V is a symbol they use for the Air Force. Like CV-40 is a carrier. V-12 was a flight designation. V is what the Navy's designations for the Air Force or the airplanes. And the V1 division, I was flight division number 1 on a flight deck.
Very interesting. They brought your ship around the Panama Canal to the West Coast. Why?
Because it was going to go on a 1-year cruise around the world. And they were going to start from California and go all the way around. I guess it was a goodwill tour for the most part. They went to Japan, they went to the Mediterranean, they came all the way around and ended up back in New York.
And you weren't interested in going on this?
No.
You wanted to come home?
The captain we had was really tough. But I understand once they went on a cruise, they eased up on the men. He would make a stand at attention in dress blues in mid-ocean. Unheard of. You know, I mean, we'd have to polish up and get dressed up and dress blues and stand at attention in mid-ocean and have inspections. So he was really, I don't want to use that word. He was tough on us. He was really tough. So I wanted to get out.
What was the trip like back to the East Coast?
They put us on these troop trains, and it took us 5 days to get back, because every time a cattle car would go by, they would sidetrack us to let the cattle car go through. And we found out very fast the next day, when we woke up in the morning, we found out you don't wake up and open up your eyes. You had to lean over the bunk and tap the back of your head to get the coal dust out of your eye sockets. And we were on a train for 5 days. We couldn't wash up, couldn't take a shower, couldn't even brush our teeth. And they brought us to New York, to Lido Beach, by train, and the first thing they did was take us in for a physical. I was so embarrassed. I said to the doctor, I said, please, I haven't showered in 5 days. He says, forget it, I get this all the time. And we weren't used to it, because we shower every day. So the first time we gone for 5 days, we had a shower. But I guess we all smelled, so we didn't notice anything.
When were you officially discharged?
I seem to think it was August 9th, 1946.
And what did you do immediately after?
I went home and goofed off. I got home and I tried to get a job, which was very difficult because everybody was getting discharged and jobs were not easy to find. And after a while, I figured I wanted to do something a little more than just work for somebody. So I went to drafting school, because I had drafting in high school and I enjoyed it. So I went to drafting school and got some more experience drafting. And I landed a job as a draftsman for a company that manufactured food market fixtures. And I did that for a while, And I ended up actually doing more than drafting for that company. I ended up doing most of the purchasing because of supplies and materials that we needed to manufacture the refrigeration and food market fixtures.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill?
The drafting school, yes.
Did you make any close friends while you were in the service?
Yes, I had I'm of Greek descent. And I met somebody in my barracks who was also of Greek descent, which we still see and still have contact with. And we went through boots together, and we were assigned to the same ship. And we were at his wedding, he was at my wedding.
Came to your birthday now?
Yeah, he just came to my 80th birthday recently. And he lives in Jersey right now. But we get together, we have reunions here for the ship. We have a national reunion once a year, and we have a local reunion for the New England states, where we get together with a smaller group. And I found out too that there's a guy in the next town in Plainville who was on the same ship with me. He was on a catapult crew, who came back on the same train that I did, but we didn't know each other. But he was friendly with my friend John, because they were in the same compartment. I was in a different compartment. And now I was friendly with John because we went through boots together. And so I just discovered this guy recently since I moved up here, and we've gotten friendly with him too.
After your service ended, did you move back where into Queensville?
Queens Village.
Queens Village?
Yes. I moved back with my parents at Queens Village, and I stayed there until we got married.
You're 24.
Yeah.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
Well, the Tarawa, USS Tarawa, they have an organization, the reunions. I belong there, and also that's about it, really. I never really joined the VFW or anything.
Where do you hold the national reunions? Do you travel around the country?
Yes, yeah, we've been to. Actually, I found out about the reunions about 10 years ago, and that was the first meeting I went to was in Baltimore, and we've been to New Mexico and Massachusetts and several different. This May we're going to South Carolina. That's where the reunion is going to be, in Charleston, South Carolina.
Where are the local ones held?
The local ones are generally, last one was at Cape Cod. We go to Maine. We go to Rhode Island. We hit all the states, the New England states. We change them every year.
That's great. And what are reunions like?
Well, generally we go there and we meet the same people year after year. And I tell you, I found it very interesting. On our ship, we had 200 Marines. And they were all tough guys. They kept us in line. And now I go to these reunions and I see these guys and they're a bunch of teddy bears. I can't believe you were a Marine on my ship. I couldn't believe it. But we see the same people all the time, which is very interesting. And generally we have several side trips that we take. We have a couple of meetings that we hold, and we have a banquet. And it's just a way of getting together with the fellows on the ship.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
No, the only thing it did for me, I guess, was I feel strongly about the fact that everybody should serve after they got out of high school, should serve some time in the service. I think it should be mandatory. It helps straighten out people. It keeps you on a straight and narrow.
How did your service affect the rest of your life?
Well, it's an experience I'll never forget, that's for sure. You grow fast, especially when you see people getting killed on a flight deck. I know it wasn't a battlefield, but still, dangerous place.
Is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
No, I'm not going to think of. I think you did a good job.
Thank you very much. Thank you for interviewing with me.